I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Today we're reading from the book of Leviticus, chapter 4, and let's focus on verses 1 through 3. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a person sins unintentionally against any of the commandments of the Lord in anything which he ought not be done, or which ought not be done, and does any of them, if the anointed priest sins, bringing guilt on the people, will let him offer to the Lord for his sin, which he has sinned, a young bull without blemish as a sin offering." Once again, Leviticus 4, verses 1 through 3. You know, there is a breakdown. There is a great dilemma that mankind is faced with. And here's the dilemma. Everybody sins. And yet we are called to be holy and to be set apart by a holy God, whose standard is perfection. We're not perfect, but we're called to be perfect. Furthermore, a sinful man has the job of atoning for the sin of a sinful nation. A sinful high priest has the unfortunate duty of interceding on behalf of a sinful nation before the presence of perfect holiness. And long before the Mosaic law, a man named Job articulated his personal need for an intercessor. And we find this in Job chapter 9, verses 32 through 35. And this is Job speaking. "For he," speaking of God, "is not a man like me, that I can answer him, and that we can take each other to court. There is no one to judge between us, to lay his hand on both of us. Let him take his rod away from me, so his terror will no longer frighten me. And then I would speak and not fear him. But that is not the case. I am on my own." Job chapter 9, verses 32 through 35. Isaiah spoke of a need for a go-between man and God in Isaiah 40, verse 27. "Jacob, why do you say, and Israel, why do you assert, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my claim is ignored by my God?" And again in Isaiah 59, verse 16, "He saw that there was no man," speaking of the Lord, "he was amazed that there was no one interceding. So his own arm brought salvation, and his own righteousness supported him." You see, what makes Jesus so much more superior than any human high priest who has to offer sacrifices for his own sin before he can offer sacrifices for a sinful people? What makes Jesus so much more superior than a human high priest is that by virtue of his atoning work on the cross, Jesus alone has satisfied God's requirements for mankind. Jesus has reckoned both God's gracious mercy with his righteous judgment. Consider these verses, Hebrews chapter 7, verse 22. Jesus has also become the guarantee of a better covenant. Or what about 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 3 through 5? "For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires that all men be saved, and to come to the knowledge of the truth. For there is one God, and one mediator between God and men, the man, the Messiah, Jesus, who gave himself a ransom for all to be a testimony at the proper time." And finally, Hebrews chapter 7, verses 26 through 28. "For this is the kind of high priest that we need, holy, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He doesn't need to offer sacrifices every day as high priests do, first for their own sin and then for those of the people. He did this once and for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints as a high priest men who are weak, but the promises of the oath, which came after the law, appoints a son who has been perfected forever." Think about these things. I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Check us out at groundworksministries.com.